This is an interview with Robert Lee Oswald, brother of Harvey Lee Harvey Oswald, accused assassinator of President Kennedy. What is your full name?
Robert Edward Lee Oswald, Jr.
And when is your birthday, Robert?
April 7th, 1934.
And where is your home residence at this time?
At Denton, Texas, 1009 Sierra Drive.
What is your occupation?
I am a sales coordinator with the Acme Brick Company, and I am with the Denton plant.
I see. Do you know what your brother has been accused of?
Yes.
What is your true opinion, your own personal opinion of what has happened?
To begin with, I can't describe it. My own feelings. I will say this: as far as the policeman's death in Dallas is concerned, I have no doubt in my mind. As far as the death of President Kennedy, I have retained, or attempted to retain, a slight doubt in my mind, even though apparently by the information that I've gathered through the press and talking with various persons, that the evidence is overwhelming that perhaps he did.
Referring to the shooting of a policeman, are you referring to Officer Tipman in Dallas?
I believe that is his name, yes.
I see.
George.
Okay.
Okay, let him come on in and call us back.
Robert, where were you when you first learned that your brother had gone to Russia?
I was in Fort Worth, Texas.
I see. And what was your thought at the time?
I can't really recall my thinking at the time, other than I was shocked. At first, I couldn't believe it at all, and after various broadcasts and so forth, it became evident that it was so. That was perhaps 3 or 4 hours, and if I recall the date correctly, it was Halloween, October 31st, 1959.
I understand that Lee was born after your father died, is that right?
That is correct.
See. How old were you at the time of your father's death?
I was 5 years old.
I see.
My father died in August 1939. Lee was born in October 1939.
Where were you living at the time? Where were you and your mother living?
At New Orleans, Louisiana.
Can you tell me anything about Lee's background, his childhood, something about him that might help us to understand why that he might commit such an act?
I searched my own mind for the same answers in reference to this act, and also at the time that we was notified that he went to Russia, even to the extent of the reasons why there. I might mention during the first month and a half that he was in Russia, we did correspond through the mails, and I did ask him the reasons why. The only answers that I can remember were more or less what the papers have reprinted in relation to the underdogs, the Negroes, and so forth.
When you learned that Robert was wanting to return to the United States with
Lee.
When Lee was wanting to return to the United States with his wife, whom he married in Russia, what did you do? What was your feeling?
It had been, I mentioned the first month and a half that he was in Russia, Moscow. At that period, I did receive a letter from Lee stating that he would no longer contact me or any member of the family, that he was severing all family contacts, and I would not hear from him any further. That he was starting his life in Russia, and that's the way he wanted it. I believe that was last of November or the first part of December of 1959. I did not hear from him again until either March or April of 1961. In his first letter, advised me that he did marry Marina, Russian girl, and that they were attempting to come to the United States. My feelings at that time was highly pleased that apparently he had changed his mind. He had seen the error of his ways, and that he did want to return and did want to bring his wife with him.
Was your mother ill at the time?
At the time that he was coming back from Russia?
Yes. In other words, did that have anything to do with him wanting to return?
Not to my knowledge. I do not believe she was at that time.
All right. And what did you do in order to assist Lee coming back to the United States?
Well, we did have a fairly regular correspondence back and forth. I believe it was taking either 10 days to 2 weeks for the interchange of letters, and he kept me posted on what progress he was making. I did not attempt to contact the State Department or anybody else. At the time, I understood that my mother was doing that. I left it in her hands. I was from time to time contacted by an FBI agent, Mr. Fain.
F-A-I-N, Fain?
I believe that's correct.
I see. In regards to his contact with you, what were these contacts? What did he want to know?
Most of the time, and I believe with the exception of perhaps once, it was all over the telephone. And there again, with the exception of once, I believe he did contact me one time over the telephone at my office in Fort Worth. The rest of the time was at my residence in Fort Worth. And the line of questioning was, what had I heard from Lee, and what progress, and what was his plans as far as I could find out.
I see. It was our understanding that you contacted someone in New York upon Lee and his wife's arrival to the United States in order to send them money to come home. Is this true?
That is correct. As I stated, Lee did keep me posted on the progress he was making. I believe it was about a month or something equal to that length of time prior to his departure that he indicated to me that everything was settled, that they would be going to Moscow to pick up the necessary passports and papers, whatever it was, that I would not hear from him again until he did reach the United States.
Who did you send the money to in New York?
I cannot recall the exact name of the organization, but I do believe it was City of New York or New York City Welfare Center or something similar to that.
I see. And they in turn got the money to your brother.
Right, I was instructed to send it to them in to Lee Harvey's name in care of them, that they would give the money to him, which they did.
Did he come to Fort Worth from New York then?
They flew by jet into Dallas Love Field, at which time my wife and myself picked them up and took them to our house in Fort Worth.
I see. And he lived at your house with you and your family, he and his family, for how long?
Approximately 2 months.
During this time, did you notice any change in him as you remembered him before he went to Russia?
No, sir, I did not. He appeared to me at that time to be the boy I've always known. I do not recall at any time that we discussed any political views. I will mention that he did ask me about whether or not I had known or had knowledge that he did receive a dishonorable discharge from the United States Marine Corps. I said I had read that in the paper, and he indicated then that he was going to have that changed if he could, and I certainly agree with that, that it was advisable, because my understanding that the reason that he did receive this dishonorable discharge was that after he went to Russia on that basis of denouncing his citizenship to the United States, that that was the reason for the dishonorable discharge.
Do you know who he contacted in regards to having this dishonorable discharge changed?
The only one I know that he mentioned directly to me was John Conley.
Was he Secretary of the Navy at the time?
I do not believe he was, because he either told me or I actually read the answer that he had forwarded to the Secretary of Navy, as he was no longer in that office, and that they would handle it from there.
I see. In other words, at the time that Lee wrote to Mr. Connolly, he thought that he was Secretary of the Navy, but he actually wasn't. He had already left the office. Is that right?
I'm remembering a little bit more now, I believe, in relation to that. I believe that he had written the Secretary of Navy, John Conley, if memory serves me right. He was in office when he did write, when Lee did write the Secretary of the Navy, John Conley. However, in between the time the correspondence were answered, that he had relinquished that office to run for governor of the state of Texas.
I see. And then the letter from Mr. Connolly advised him that his request had been forwarded to the State Department. Is that right?
Or to the office of the Secretary of the Navy. I do not know whether it was the State Department or to the then Secretary of the Navy. I believe that was.
Oh, I see.
Mr.
Carth.
Yes.
All right. What was Lee's reaction to the answer that he got from Mr. Connolly?
I don't recall any significance, and I just really don't remember his reaction to that, other than he either told me or I read the letter that he did receive. I cannot recall which.
I see. Did he receive any other news from Washington in regards to changing this dishonorable discharge that you know of?
Not to my knowledge, he did not.
See. Did he write to anyone else that you know of?
This is by hearsay at that time, and since the time of the president's death, John Kennedy, that he did write, or apparently wrote, Jim Wright, congressman from Fort Worth.
I see. But you don't know of him ever writing to President Kennedy?
No, sir, I know of no letter that he ever wrote to the President of the United States.
Did you know, or do you know, whether or not that Lee had a rifle?
At that time? At that time?
Yes.
To my knowledge, and they did literally carry in everything they owned at that time off the plane. No, I retract that. They did have some express that came from New York. It was all at the house. I feel certain that I saw every piece of it. There was no rifle at that time. No weapon of any kind.
That's during the time that he was living with you at Fort Worth?
That's correct.
I see. After he left your home, where did he go to live?
He lived out for a period of approximately a month with my mother in Fort Worth.
Did you still have pretty good contact and relations with him?
Yes, I certainly did.
I see. Why did he move from your home?
I do not recall any specific reason, other than I know that my mother did want him and his wife to stay with them some, and that would be the only reason that I can think of.
And he then moved from your mother's home. Where did he move to?
They rented a duplex across the street from Montgomery Ward in Fort Worth, and I can't recall how long they were there. It wasn't very long.
Where did he work during the time he was in Fort Worth?
I do not know the name of the firm. I was there once. It was a small business that I could gather located in a large warehouse off the White Settlement Street in Fort Worth. The business was type of metalwork. I believe their main product was the metal ventilating that go on top of residences.
I see. Is that the only place that he worked that you know of?
In Fort Worth?
Yes.
Yes.
And how long overall did he stay in Fort Worth before moving?
He arrived there in June of 1962, and the best I can remember that he left Fort Worth prior to Thanksgiving. I would estimate during the very latter part of October or the first part of November.
In 1962?
Of 1962.
Yes, I see. During the time he was in Fort Worth, do you know whether or not that he was contacted or visited by any federal agency, any law enforcement agency connected with the federal government?
Yes, I can recall only one time that they asked him, and I believe I took the original call at my residence from the FBI Bureau in Fort Worth. I do not recall. I believe it was Mr. Fain, asking whether or not it was possible for him to speak to Lee, which Lee agreed to do so. He spoke to him on the phone, and they did set up an interview, I believe, at his office in Fort Worth.
Did you were not present then when the interview took place?
No, I was not. I recall that after I returned from work, I believe that interview was the next day. And after I returned from work the next day, I asked Lee about it. He just said it was more or less the same old thing or something along that nature. He did laugh about one question, and the way I recall the question that the agent put to him, was he an agent of the federal government that was sent to Russia? He said, he replied, "Well, don't you know?" And this he laughed about.
I see. And where did he move to from Fort Worth?
He moved to Dallas, Texas. I never did have his apartment or residential address. 2 or 3 days after he moved to Dallas, I received a postcard from him with a P.O. box number in Dallas.
Do you remember this number offhand?
I believe it was Post Office Box 2918, Dallas, Texas.
And you never did know what his address was in Dallas?
No, sir, I did not. I asked him in my first letter why the post office box, or how else could I contact him. And his reply in his letter was that he was not settled, they had not taken an apartment or a residence to live in, and that he would retain this post office box where I could always reach him.
I see. And did he correspond with you regularly while he was in Dallas?
No, sir, he did not.
How long was he there?
In Dallas?
Yes, this time.
To my knowledge, until Friday night of this past week, I would assume that he had been in Dallas the entire time. I was not aware that he ever left Dallas.
I see. Were you aware of the fact that he and his wife were not living together during the week?
No, sir, I was not.
You did not know this?
I might say that from the time that he did move from Fort Worth to Dallas, and up until this Friday, I received either just 3 or 4 letters from him that were scattered over a period of that time, very infrequent.
Did he ever mention to you that he was distressed or upset about anything that had happened to him to the point to where he might become violent?
No, sir, he did not. And I restate my feelings at the time that he returned to the United States in June of 1962. To me, he was the boy that I always known. Older, but still the same as far as I was concerned.
I see. You didn't know that he had moved to New Orleans for a short period of time, is that right?
Since his return from Russia?
Yes.
No, sir, I was not aware of that.
I see. Do you know this man, Mr. Payne, that was the landlord where Lee's wife, Maria, was living?
I met Mr. Payne briefly at the Dallas police station Friday night. the death of the president.
That was November 22nd, 1963.
November 22nd, 1963. I met him at the Dallas police station, at which time he and his wife, Mrs. Payne, were taking Lee's wife, Marina, and my mother and their two small children to their home.
Did you have a discussion with him at the time?
No, sir, I did not. I really didn't know who he was until they started to leave, and then I was advised that that's where Marina had been staying, was at the Payne's residence.
I see. And you didn't know Mr. Payne any prior to this time?
No, sir.
Do you know Jack Rubenstein?
No, sir, I do not.
Have you ever heard that name before?
I have never heard that name before.
You have been told that he is the person that shot your brother at Dallas.
Yes, sir, I have.
Do you have any idea as to what the reason was that Mr. Rubenstein shot your brother?
No, sir, I certainly do not.
Is there anything else that you might tell us in regards to any of these incidents that we've discussed?
No, sir, I do not know of anything that I could add to what I've already said.
Do you, let me say this, do you, did you know that Lee owned a rifle during the time that he was in Dallas?
No, sir, I did not.
You did not know that he owned a rifle?
No, sir, I did not.
I see. Do you know of a pistol? Do you know of him owning a revolver of any type?
No, sir. I was not aware that he owned any type of firearm.
I see. Did you ever do any shooting with Lee, or did you do any hunting or anything of that sort?
Yes, sir. I do recall hunting with him at one time, which I do believe was after his release from the Marine Corps. He stayed 2 or 3 days in Fort Worth.
This was prior to the time he went to Russia?
That is correct.
All right.
And that at that time we had gone to my wife's family's farm and had taken Lee, and that he and I and my brother-in-law did go rabbit and squirrel hunting.
Okay. Did Lee or did Lee's wife or your mother say anything to you since the time that Lee returned to the United States from Russia about the FBI or any other federal agency contacting him in Dallas or in Irving?
Could I hear that again, please, Mike?
Do you know from your mother or from Lee's wife, Marina, whether or not that any federal agency contacted him at either Irving or Dallas in the past few months?
No, sir, I do not know that, other than what I've overheard today. I did not have any prior knowledge of any contact made by the Federal Bureau.
I see. And what you're speaking to, you're referring to what Marina told myself and Agent Charles Kunkel?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. You didn't know about them trying to contact him?
No, sir.
Did you know whether or not that Lee belonged to any subversive organizations or any organizations in Dallas?
No, sir, I was not aware of any type of organization that he did belong to or was associated with.
Did you know that whether or not he had contact or was receiving literature of any kind from Russia?
I believe that during the period that he was living at the duplex across from Montgomery Ward's prior to moving to Dallas, I believe at one time when I was there, I do recall seeing some type of Russian magazine. Whether or not it came from there or this was available at newsstands, I do not know.
Have you ever heard of an organization called the Fair Play for Cuba Committee?
Not until tonight. And there again, in relation to your interview with Marina, I never had heard of it before, to my knowledge.
And you did not know that he was that Lee was connected with this?
No, sir.
Patterson's on the phone.
Okay.
Stand by. Call us back.
All right, Robert. We won't continue this too much further because I don't feel like that that you do have any real information that might help us in this case. But overall, let me ask you: do you know any Cubans yourself?
No, sir, I do not.
Do you know whether Lee knew any Cubans?
No, sir, I do not.
Do you belong to any Cuban sympathizer organizations?
Do I?
Yes.
No, sir.
Do you know that Lee was?
No, sir, I do not.
Is there anything that you can think of that you might tell us that might help us in putting this story together?
No, sir, I cannot think of anything that in any remote possibility that would be of service in this respect. If I did, I would certainly give that information.
You said something to me at the police department yesterday in regards to your feelings to what has happened to President Kennedy. What are your feelings as far as what has happened here?
I'm not recalling.
You remember you asked me if I would relay a message to
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That message was generally my deepest sympathy to Mrs. Kennedy and her family on the death of the president.
I see. Okay, Robert, thank you very much. How tall are you now?
5'11" and a half.
And how much do you weigh?
150 pounds.
And what color is your hair
Brown,
and your eyes?
blue.
I see. Are you married?
Yes.
What is your wife's name?
Veda. That's V as in Victor. A-D-A. Marie Oswald.
And how old is she?
She is 25.
And do you have any children?
Yes, sir, I do.
How many children do you have?
I have 2 children. One girl who's 6 years old,
What is her name?
Kathy Marie Oswald, and a boy. He's 2.5 years old, and his name is Robert also.
Okay.